Yo guys, it's your boy. And today we have luckiest people who survived death. Near death. It's crazy though. Alright, the video is why be amazed.
This probably looks like a scene that would appear in your nightmares moments before you jolt awake in cold sweats. But this terrifying moment was far from a dream for tourist Chris Gursky, who had to cling on for dear life as he soared through the skies after a hang gliding instructor forgot to strap him in properly. And he's not the only one who survived the impossible. Whether the jaw-dropping circumstances or Final Destination-style car accidents, 133 days stranded at sea, or 30 minutes on the seabed without any oxygen. Stick around as we find out how these incredibly lucky people had their bacon saved when the odds were truly stacked against them. It's gonna be a real nail-biter. Danny Balch. If you're looking for danger, camping out next to an active volcano is one surefire way to find it. Back in 1980, Danny J. Balch and his friend Brian Thomas were camping in a meadow near Mount St. Helens when they were jolted awake at 8:32 a.m. by an intense rumbling sound. When the pair looked out of the tent window, their worst fears were confirmed. An eruption was heading their way. As they dashed for the tree line, Balch was hit by a blast of heat and a shower of ash, mud, and ice that caked him in grit and pushed him flat to the ground. In those few seconds, his entire body went from frozen to baked as the extreme heat melted the skin off his fingers. When he came to, Balch called out for Thomas and managed to wade into the river to soothe his burns. As he resumed his search and began scrambling through fallen trees, he suddenly felt a hand on his left shoulder that took him by surprise. When he looked down, he was shocked to see Thomas under a tangle of tree limbs. Thomas had a broken hip, but Balch was able to pull him up just before the cloud of ash plunged the sky into darkness so that neither man could see just inches in front of them. Miraculously, two other campers in the group, Bruce Nelson and Sue Ruff, who had been toasting marshmallows at the time of the explosion, saw the two men and helped carry Thomas to the ruins of an old cabin where they built a makeshift lean-to. Balch then set off with the others to find rescue, and they were eventually spotted at about 6 p.m. by two helicopters. But he didn't forget about Thomas. Balch used a map to show them where his friend was, and the men were airlifted to the hospital to recover. The worst part is that Balch had wanted to go to the beach that day, but was convinced by Thomas to go camping at the volcano. Never give in to peer pressure, guys.
Yeah, thank God that we don't have volcano in the case.
Helen Klaben. The year was 1963, and then 21-year-old Helen Klaben was on the hunt for adventure. She'd left her hometown of Brooklyn to head for Hong Kong or India, but she had to reach San Francisco first, which meant getting on a flight to Whitehorse, the capital of the Yukon Territory. Klaben was on a budget, so she decided to fly with an amateur pilot, 41-year-old Ralph Flores, in his single-engine plane instead. What could go wrong? The pair set off on February 4th, 1963, but not long into the journey, Flores ran into a snowstorm and tried to take the plane above the clouds. When he descended, he hoped to follow landmarks or the path of the Alaska Highway to reach Fort St. John, but instead he was met with mountains and trees. Before Klaben could understand what was going on, the plane crashed into a desolate stretch of wilderness near the Yukon-British Columbia border. The pair miraculously survived. Klaben suffered a broken left arm and Flores a fractured jaw, but they were now stranded in sub-zero temperatures as low as -42 degrees Celsius. The little food they had on board, a few cans of sardines, tuna, fruit salad, a box of saltine crackers, and some vitamin pills, were rationed within 10 days, forcing them to make soup from melted snow. The pair were able to create a shelter from a piece of tarpaulin and cushions from the plane, while they also fashioned a blanket from the plane's carpet and used gasoline from the fuel tank to light a campfire that would keep them warm at night. Eventually, Flores found a frozen pond and etched an enormous SOS sign with an arrow pointing to their campsite. On day 49 of their ordeal, Charles Hamilton, a pilot flying supplies to a nearby trapper's cabin, spotted the SOS and rescued them. Klaben passed away in 2018, age 76, but the story of her amazing survival will continue to live on in her 1964 book, Hey, I'm Alive. Man, all this talk of danger is enough to make you grateful for your own safety. How many of you are watching this video from the comfort of your bed right now? Why not give this video a like and subscribe so I know there are thrill seekers?
Facts. I'm pretty grateful for that. But also, is to be scared of airplanes. It's scary.
Out there who love binging this kind of heart-pumping stuff while shoveling down on cheese balls at home. Oh, and show that little bell icon some love too, so you never miss out on an upload. Ready for another epic tale of survival? Julianne Kopke. If you have a fear of flying, you might want to cover your ears for this one. On Christmas Eve, 1971, then 17-year-old Julianne Kopke was flying over the Peruvian rainforest on Lanza Flight 508 with her mother when things took a turn for the worst. The plane flew into a dark, violent storm which shook the entire cabin before all the lights cut out and the aircraft went into a total nosedive. Kopke closed her eyes tightly and covered her ears to drown out the noise of passengers screaming and the deep roar of the engines. But suddenly, it all stopped. The plane had
That's why I used to be scared as a kid.
disintegrated about 2 miles above the ground, and she was now in free fall, still strapped to her seat. As the canopy of the jungle spun towards her, Kopke blacked out just before impact. The next day, she awoke in the rainforest and realized she was totally alone. She was the sole survivor of the crash, but her ordeal still wasn't over yet. She had a broken collarbone and some deep cuts on her
Wait, what the fuck? How did she survive that?
legs, but Kopke was able to walk until she found a stream to follow. After being alone in the wilderness for 10 days, Kopke found a small path to a hut with a palm roof. Nearby was an outboard motor from a large boat and a liter of gasoline, which she used to treat a maggot-infested wound on her right arm. After spending the night there, Kopke was awoken to the voices of men outside, who initially thought she was a water goddess from local legend. After explaining her ordeal in Spanish, the men treated her wounds and took her back to civilization where she was reunited with her father. Kopke told her amazing story in the 2000 documentary Wings of Hope by director Werner Herzog, who coincidentally had a seat booked on that very flight before canceling last minute. Danny Pienaar. In 1998, Danny Pienaar was a research student studying the habits of white rhinos in the Pa-Beni tributary in South Africa. But this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity almost ended in tragedy. On one Thursday afternoon that January, Pienaar decided to head out on a tracking expedition without telling his campmates where he was going. As he waded through the waters of a small stream, Pienaar saw something long and brown slithering in the nearby reeds. The next thing he knew, Pienaar felt a burning sensation on one side of his leg, just under the knee. After looking down and finding 4 bluish-purple holes and a drop of blood, his worst suspicions were confirmed. He'd just been bitten by a black mamba snake. Black mamba venom is notoriously
That's the worst. Oh my shit,
fast
that's so
acting
bad.
as it shuts down the nervous system and paralyzes victims, and without any venom, its fatality rate is 100%. Pienaar knew now that his only chance of survival was to make it back to his car and attempt the long trek back to the main town. Despite tying a tourniquet around his leg, the venom was already taking over his body as tunnel vision set in and his heartbeat sped up. After feverishly making his way back through the wilderness, Pienaar reached his car and drove over 100 miles per hour down the road until he saw another car and forced them to stop. By the time they reached the hospital in Nelspruit, over 2 hours after he was bitten, Pienaar could no longer swallow or speak as paralysis set in. After several days on a ventilator, Pienaar was released with nothing but the bite marks and one awesome story to tell. Poon Lim. When Chinese native Poon Lim took a job as a steward on a British ship named the SS Ben Lomond, which was traveling from Cape Town to Suriname during World War II, he probably never imagined that it'd earn him a world record for the longest time spent adrift at sea. In 1942, a German U-boat came across the SS Ben Lomond 750 miles east of the Amazon, and a pair of torpedoes sank it in 2 minutes flat. It happened so fast that most of the crew on board sunk with the vessel. Of the total 55 crew members, Poon Lim would be the only survivor. As the ship sank, Lim managed to grab a life jacket and jump overboard just before the boilers exploded. After drifting aimlessly for about 2 hours, Lim spotted an 8 by 8 foot raft and hauled himself onto it. The raft contained some meager survival rations, including tins of dried biscuits, 40 liters of water, a bag of sugar cubes, chocolate, an electric torch, and a handful of flares. But the food didn't last long, and Lim had to improvise by taking the wire from the flashlight and making a fish hook, which he fixed to the end of some hemp rope as a makeshift line. He also fashioned a knife out of the biscuit tin, which he used to kill seabirds, and then used the bird meat to catch sharks. As if that wasn't badass enough, Lim did all this without ever learning how to swim properly. In fact, he tied himself to the raft with rope to make sure he never fell off. Poon Lim spent a grand total of 133 days at sea until 3 Brazilian fishermen spotted his raft on the 5th of April 1943 and rescued him. He'd lost nearly 20 pounds in weight, but was crucially alive. When Poon Lim was asked what he thought of his world record, he simply said, "I hope no one will have to break it." Imagine going through an ordeal like that and still having a sense of humor about it. Do any of you guys have any crazy survival stories to tell? Maybe a relative.
That's a lot of time to be alive. No way, no way. I mean, like to be alive in that scenario.
A friend of yours had a run-in with fate that needs to be shared with the world. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll get back to some of my favorites. Chris Gursky.
Hell no.
If you're in a
Hell no. Hell no. I don't like heights. I don't like heights. No way. I don't like heights. Heights is scary.
adrenaline junkie, hang gliding might be your thing,
Fuck.
but you might want to think twice after seeing this.
Oh shit. Oh shit. It's hot.
The man you see here
It's hanging by a hand.
clinging desperately to prevent himself from
Hell
plummeting
no.
to his death is Florida auto parts manager and photographer Chris Gursky. Back in 2018, Gursky was vacationing in Switzerland when he decided to give hang gliding a go for the first time. Little did he know it was almost the last thing he'd get to do. You see, Gursky's instructor forgot one crucial thing: hooking Gursky onto the glider. After taking off from a 4,000-foot mountain ledge, Gursky had to hang on for an agonizing 2 minutes and 14 seconds as the pilot desperately tried to steer with one hand to get him safely to the ground. Thankfully, the pair were able to make a safe landing, and Gursky walked away with a torn left bicep tendon from hanging on and a fractured wrist from the force of the impact when he hit the floor. After uploading the jaw-dropping
I'm glad that this stays alive. You need to say that that's literally death.
footage of his ordeal online, Gursky said he wasn't angry at the instructor and would even give hang gliding another go. That's one
No, man. If I was him, I would shoot him.
seriously brave dude. Kutu Shaw. Animal attacks are no laughing matter, and if there's one creature you don't want to face off against, it's a 400-pound polar bear. Just ask Kutu Shaw.
Jesus.
In September 2003, 46-year-old Shaw was working as a guide on a hunting trip in Kemerut, Canada, when things took a grisly turn. In the early hours of the morning, Shaw and the captain of the Mayukalik Hunters and Trappers organization awoke to find that the ceiling of their tent had been shredded as they slept. At first, it looked like the tent had been filled with snow, but as their bleary eyes adjusted, they realized it wasn't snow. It was the white fur of the perpetrator, which was now looming over the men. The captain immediately started running, and after failing to find a knife in the tent, Shaw joined him. But the fearsome polar bear was hot on their heels. Shaw was about 4 paces behind the captain, but then the unthinkable happened. He tripped on a small rock, and before he knew it, the 400-pound beast came down on top of him. The polar bear dragged Shaw towards the ocean, then gouged its claws into his back and sunk its ginormous teeth into his head. Just when it looked like it was game over for Shaw, the group's cook grabbed a gun that belonged to one of the American sport hunters and shot the bear twice, killing the animal. Amazingly, Shaw never lost consciousness. When they finally reached the ER, 3 handfuls of sand were removed from the blood-clotted area around his skull, which may have saved his life by slowing down the bleeding. After 13 hours of intensive surgery, Shaw walked free with a new nickname in Kemerut, the Polar
Fuck, 30 hours. It's crazy.
Bear Man. Chris Lemons. In September 2012, Edinburgh-born saturation diver Chris Lemons was working in the North Sea, diving from his ship, the Bibi Topaz, and a diving bell to repair oil rig structures. One fateful day, Chris was lowered 91 meters in a diving bell alongside colleagues Dave Yusa and Duncan Alcock to fix a pipe on the seabed at the Huntington oil field east of Peterhead in Aberdeenshire. But this was almost one trip he didn't return from. During the repair, Chris heard an alarm sounding in dive control, which meant getting out of the structure and back to the diving bell as quickly as possible. What the men didn't know was that the ship was moving away thanks to a failure in the computer which kept it in position. Then disaster struck. Lemons' umbilical cable became snagged on part of the metal structure. This not only tethers divers back to the diving bell and the ship, but also provides them with breathing gas, hot water to keep their suits warm, as well as light and electricity. With the 8,000-ton boat pulling in the opposite direction, and Lemons basically acting as a human anchor, there was only one outcome. The umbilical cable snapped, plunging him 100 meters down towards the seabed. Without it, Chris only had about 5 minutes of emergency gas stored in a set of normal diving cylinders on his back. He managed to find the structure they'd been working on and climbed on top of it, but the diving bell wasn't there, and he'd already used up about 2 to 3 minutes of gas. The clock was ticking, and Chris accepted his fate and blacked out. His colleagues put in a superhuman effort to locate him, but they were expecting to find a body, which is exactly what they thought when they found Chris laying on the floor of the rig. But after being hauled onto the diving bell and given 2 breaths, Lemons sputtered to life, 35 minutes after he had turned on his emergency supply of air. With nothing to breathe for that long, Chris could have easily suffered brain damage, but the gas they breathe has a high concentration of oxygen, which saturated his tissues and cells to allow him to survive. In just 3 weeks, this extremely lucky guy was even back working with his team again. Coolidge Winsett. Popping to the toilet to drop off some timber probably isn't at the top of your list of potentially life-threatening situations, but you can never be too safe. Just ask Coolidge Winsett. Winsett is a 75-year-old retired janitor and World War II veteran who lives in the very same home he grew up in Southwest Virginia. The problem is the property hadn't changed much over the years and there was no indoor bathroom. Just a rickety old outhouse Winsett had built himself back in 1950. That didn't bother old Winsett. He'd been using it for years.
Sorry.
He didn't think twice about paying it a visit one hot afternoon in August 2000. But while Winsett sat minding his own business, literally, the rotting floorboards below finally gave way, dumping the retired veteran into the filthy pit below. Luckily for him, he was able to stay afloat after landing on the remains of the floorboards, which acted like a makeshift raft. Unfortunately, Winsett had already been partially paralyzed by a stroke and was missing part of one leg, leaving him well and truly stuck. As time ticked by, the 17-year-old mailman, the only regular visitor to Winsett's property, noticed that the mail had started piling up, so he decided to investigate. Luckily, he discovered Winsett after following his weakened cries, and the old man was rescued by the fire department after 3 whole days in the pit. Now that's one seriously crappy ordeal. The Robertson family. On the 27th of January 1971, the Robertson family from the village of Merebrook in Staffordshire, UK, set off from Falmouth, Cornwall on a voyage to parts unknown. Retired merchant naval officer Dougal Robertson had purchased a 43-foot wooden schooner called Lucette, which would be perfect for the educational adventure he had planned for his wife Lynn, 18-year-old son Douglas, 17-year-old daughter Anne, and twin sons Neil and Sandy, both 9. Over the next year and a half, the family sailed across the Atlantic, stopping at different Caribbean ports and taking in amazing sights all over the world. But on the 15th of June 1972, the family encountered a pod of killer whales near the Galapagos Islands, which launched an attack, damaging the boat beyond repair. The family, plus a student hitchhiker they'd picked up named Robin Williams, managed to scramble on board an inflatable lifeboat and dinghy. Once stranded, the group got by for 6 days on a few rations like biscuits, dried bread, onions, and fruits. But they eventually resorted to hunting turtles to eat and collecting rainwater to drink. After 16 days, the inflatable raft became unusable, so the 6 people crammed onto the 10-foot-long dinghy called the Ednamere, taking it in turns to sit in the dry part of the boat. Finally, on the 23rd of July 1972, 38 days into their trip on the Ednamere, they were picked up after a Japanese fishing trawler named the Tokomaru II spotted their distress fire. Next time you fancy some family bonding time, just stick to the Scrabble.
Why the fuck would you risk your kid's life?
Rui Mahamatsu. As far as car accidents go, this one has got to be
Oh,
something
shit,
straight out of a
fuck.
nightmare. This spine-chilling photograph
Shit.
was taken in March 2014 after
Yeah,
football player
I know
Rui
that.
Mahamatsu, who plays for Johannesburg's Orlando Pirates, had a narrow brush with death on the highway. Mahamatsu had been driving his BMW 3 Series when the car slipped on a wet patch of road, causing him to lose control. Before he knew it, the entire vehicle was impaled by a guardrail that pierced the windscreen and exited through the back, all while miraculously missing the driver himself. Onlookers were shocked to see Mr. Mahamatsu walk
Fuck.
away from the accident without a single scratch on him. Someone up above must really have been looking out for him that day. And if that wasn't quite Final Destination enough for you, take a look at this total nail-biter. It's hard to imagine surviving something like this, but one lucky motorist in Western China is living
Stop. How the fuck was
proof that it can be done. In 2015, the unnamed man was driving to Chongqing when he heard a loud bang coming from the opposite lane. Before he had time to process what was happening, he spotted a huge circular blade bouncing through the bushes of the central reservation, which then smashed into the front of his vehicle. Highway police said a truck had crashed in the opposite lane and the saw blade had been thrown off and into the road. The driver may have escaped unharmed, but this 50-centimeter gouge is one scratch that isn't going to come off too easily. I bet your blood pressure.
That's it for today. I hope the all news is good. Leave a like, subscribe. I will see you guys later. Take care.